The first light of dawn spilled across the naval base, painting the concrete in soft hues of gold and silver. A thin layer of morning mist hung over the roads, twisting around the lamp posts like ethereal tendrils, and the distant hum of engines marked the beginning of another day. At the main gate, Emily Carter stood at attention, her uniform crisp, her boots polished to a mirror shine, her badge gleaming under the early sunlight. The cold air nipped at her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It was a reminder she was awake, alert, alive. Emily had been a gate guard for 3 years, a civilian in a world of soldiers, sailors and officers, yet she carried herself with an unwavering sense of purpose. To some, her role seemed mundane, even trivial. She checked IDs, waved cars through, and enforced base rules. To Emily, however, every ID represented a life dedicated to something bigger than themselves, a story woven into the fabric of the nation's defense. She had learned early on that respect wasn't always returned, it was earned through consistency, vigilance, and a refusal to cut corners. She glanced down the line of cars entering the base. A beat-up sedan with 2 young recruits slowed as it approached her. Their hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and Emily could see the tension in their eyes. She offered them a small smile. "Good morning. IDs, please?" The driver handed over the credentials with trembling hands. Emily inspected the papers carefully, scanning each detail, verifying every hologram and expiration date. The passenger, a young man barely out of high school, tried to meet her gaze, but looked away, embarrassed. "First day?" she asked gently. "Yes, ma'am," he admitted. I'm nervous." Emily nodded knowingly. She had been where he was, once, standing at a gate that seemed vast and intimidating, surrounded by people who had already proven themselves in ways she could only dream of. "Take a deep breath. You'll do fine," she said. "And remember, don't rush. Focus on what matters." The car moved on, and Emily straightened, scanning the incoming convoy. The rhythm of her morning was familiar, almost meditative. A car stops, credentials are checked, a nod is given, and the vehicle moves on. Yet, today something felt different. A subtle shift in the air, a tension she couldn't quite place, made her senses sharper. She shrugged it off, reminding herself that she had been trained to notice anomalies, to trust instincts without overthinking them. Her station was at the very front of the base, a small booth perched beside a sprawling gate that opened onto a labyrinth of roads, hangars, and administrative buildings. From here, she could see everything: the hustle of morning exercises, the rhythm of officers arriving, the trucks loaded with supplies rumbling past. It was her vantage point, her window into a world of discipline and duty that was foreign yet magnetic. She liked observing quietly. The faces, the gestures, the subtle cues of camaraderie or exhaustion, they all told stories. Emily's mind wandered to her father as she adjusted her cap. A retired Marine, he had taught her about duty, honor, and the quiet power of consistency. "The uniform doesn't make the man," he had said. "It's what you do while wearing it or standing beside it that counts." That advice had stayed with her, shaping the way she approached every day at the gate. She wasn't in a uniform of rank or authority, but she was a guardian nonetheless. Every ID she checked, every hand she shook, every nod she gave was a tribute to that philosophy. As she leaned slightly forward to greet the next car, she noticed something, a pattern she had learned to detect after months of practice. The security scanners beeped, but subtly, almost dismissively. The driver looked uneasy, fidgeting with the seatbelt. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. She was trained to spot hesitation, the tiniest anomaly, and her intuition tingled. She spoke in a calm voice, the kind that carried authority without aggression. "Ma'am, sir, please step out of the vehicle for a secondary check." The driver blinked, surprised, while the passenger stiffened. "Is there a problem?" the driver asked, his voice defensive. Emily shook her head. "Just a routine check. Please cooperate, it'll take a minute." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Her tone was firm, but respectful, a balance she had perfected over countless mornings. She had learned that respect earned compliance far better than fear ever could. As the driver complied, Emily's attention flicked to the other side of the base. The sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Soldiers jogged past in formation, their synchronized movements a rhythmic testament to discipline. She admired them silently. They didn't notice her, but she noticed them, the strain in their muscles, the sweat glistening on their brows, the determination in their eyes. She liked these moments of quiet observation, where she could remind herself that even her small role mattered. The secondary check was completed smoothly, and the car moved on. Emily allowed herself a small exhale. It was moments like these that reinforced her belief in diligence. She had prevented a potential security issue without anyone even noticing the effort. She returned to her watch, scanning the horizon again. Her eyes fell on the large gate in the distance, the point where incoming traffic would soon meet her. A convoy of sleek black SUVs was approaching, unusual for this hour. The radio crackled with static, followed by a clipped message from the supervisor. VIP incoming. Be prepared. Emily's pulse quickened slightly. She had faced high-security situations before, but the term VIP on a naval base could mean anyone from a commanding officer to a visiting dignitary. Her instincts sharpened instantly. She straightened, gripping the edge of her booth as if it anchored her. The morning routine vanished, replaced by heightened focus. Every detail mattered now. The angle of approach, the number of vehicles, the order of passengers, the subtle cues that distinguished a routine convoy from something requiring immediate attention. Her mind cataloged each aspect, and her body responded automatically, training and instinct merged into precision. The black SUVs glinted under the morning sun, rolling closer. Emily raised her hand in the standard signal for the lead vehicle to stop. The convoy slowed obediently. A hush seemed to fall over the base entrance. Other guards glanced at her with curiosity, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Emily didn't flinch. She had no idea what awaited her beyond the gate, but she knew one thing. She would uphold her duty, no matter who was behind the wheel. Inside her heart, a quiet resolve took root. For years, she had stood at this gate, unnoticed, uncelebrated. Today, something felt different, though she couldn't yet name it. A shift, subtle and profound, whispered that her ordinary post could become extraordinary in the blink of an eye. She had no illusions about grandeur, only the certainty that her vigilance, her commitment, and her unwavering adherence to duty could make a difference, even in ways she hadn't yet imagined. As the lead SUV finally halted at her gate, Emily raised her hand, took a deep breath, and prepared to meet the day in a way she had never before. She was only at the gate, but perhaps, she thought fleetingly, today would change everything. The convoy had passed, leaving behind the usual hum of engines and the soft clatter of footsteps on the asphalt. Emily Carter allowed herself a small exhale, but her mind didn't quiet. She returned her gaze to the base, taking in the familiar, yet ever-changing flow of activity. Soldiers moved briskly between buildings, some carrying heavy packs, others gesturing to each other with an urgency that only those who lived by the clock could understand. She had always been fascinated by the rhythm of military life, the precision, the discipline, the subtle hierarchies that governed every movement. Emily often felt like a silent observer in a world that didn't stop for anyone. From her gate booth, she saw the stories that unfolded daily, unnoticed by most. A young recruit huddled over a clipboard, his eyes darting nervously as he tried to memorize procedures. A corporal walked past him, offering a brief nod and a few curt instructions before disappearing down the hall. Emily had learned to read these moments, to see the human behind the uniform. Each expression, each hesitation, told a story, even when the wearer believed they were hiding it. Sometimes she imagined their lives beyond the base gates. What had brought them here? What did they carry in their hearts, hidden behind layers of discipline and duty? There was a young man, barely 18, who always jogged past her station in the mornings. He had a faint scar above his left eyebrow, and Emily wondered if it had been earned in training, or if it came from a life before he wore the uniform. She had never asked, and he had never offered, but she saw the weight of responsibility in the set of his shoulders. The base had a rhythm all its own, and Emily had become attuned to its subtle cues. She could tell when someone was off schedule, when tensions ran high, or when a small mishap had shaken a soldier's confidence. She had noticed, for instance, a sergeant who always lingered near the mess hall in the mornings. Emily had seen him pause mid-step one day, stare at a corner of the yard, and then quickly compose himself before walking on. She had no idea what he had seen or remembered, but she understood that discipline often concealed pain. The uniform was a shield, and she respected it silently. It was during these quiet observations that Emily felt most connected to her purpose. She wasn't just a gate guard. She was a witness to the human side of the military. And while her role was small in the grand machinery of the base, it mattered. Every greeting, every nod, every inspection reinforced the structure that allowed the larger operations to function smoothly. She took pride in being the first line of welcome, and occasionally the first line of defense. Even if no one noticed, she knew that her presence made a difference. On that particular morning, Emily noticed something she hadn't before: a slight unease among some of the junior officers arriving from morning drills. Their steps were hurried, their glances fleetingly anxious. She didn't jump to conclusions, but her instincts, a combination of experience and intuition, whispered that there was more beneath the surface. She had learned long ago that in environments like this, even the smallest sign could foreshadow larger events. Her attention drifted momentarily to the distant training grounds, where she could see the figures of soldiers running laps in formation. They moved in perfect synchronization, yet their faces betrayed exhaustion and focus. Emily admired the quiet determination in their eyes. To most, they were just bodies in motion, part of the base's background scenery. To her, each individual was a story, a young man or woman leaving family behind, carrying ambitions and fears, striving to prove themselves in a world that demanded perfection. Emily's thoughts often returned to her father. A retired Marine, he had taught her lessons she now applied daily without realizing it. Respect the duty, respect the people, but never forget yourself, he had said. He had told her stories of vigilance, of moments when small actions saved lives. He had also emphasized observation, the ability to notice what others overlooked. That advice had shaped her approach to the gate. She didn't just check IDs. She watched, analyzed, and understood the people who crossed her path. As she leaned against the edge of her booth, Emily's gaze fell on a young recruit struggling with a large duffel bag. He stumbled slightly, catching himself on the railing. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice calm but authoritative. The young man nodded, grateful, and she helped him adjust the bag onto his shoulder. There was no applause, no recognition, just a simple nod of thanks. Yet for Emily, these small moments defined her day. Each act of assistance, each demonstration of patience and care, was a way of honoring the people who served. The morning continued its predictable rhythm, but Emily's mind was far from idle. She mentally catalogued the movements of soldiers, noting their patterns, habits, and anomalies. A corporal who always waved at her passed without acknowledgement. A sergeant adjusted his hat at an odd angle, lingering slightly longer than usual near the main building. Emily filed these details away, not out of suspicion, but out of careful observation. In a world where precision was life and death, even minor irregularities mattered. Around mid-morning, a small commotion near the training grounds caught Emily's attention. A group of recruits had broken formation, whispering urgently among themselves. She could hear snippets of their conversation as she focused her hearing. "Did you see that?" One whispered. "I think the commander's here." Another voice added, "No way. That's impossible." Emily felt her pulse quicken slightly. Something was coming. An instinct told her it would be significant. She straightened, adjusting her posture, preparing for whatever was approaching her gate. Her eyes scanned the incoming traffic with renewed intensity. The rhythm of the morning had shifted. She noticed small details, the angle of headlights, the pace of approaching vehicles, the subtle changes in the driver's behavior. Everything pointed to an unusual convoy, though she had no way of knowing who it carried. Her fingers tightened slightly on the ID scanner. She had been at this gate for years, but every unusual moment brought a surge of adrenaline she had learned to embrace rather than fear. Emily's thoughts wandered briefly to what might lie ahead. Was it a visiting officer? A dignitary? Or perhaps a commanding officer returning from deployment? She couldn't know, but the possibility that her quiet vigilance might soon be tested filled her with both anticipation and resolve. She adjusted her cap, took a deep breath, and reminded herself of the lessons that had carried her through countless mornings like this. Stay alert, stay calm, and uphold the duty above all else. The sun had climbed higher, illuminating the base with a harsh, brilliant clarity. Shadows retreated, leaving nothing hidden. Emily felt a deep sense of purpose in the routine, knowing that the simple act of standing guard was itself a statement of discipline and integrity. It was easy to overlook, easy to dismiss, but she understood its value. She was the first impression, the first line of order, and perhaps the silent witness to events that would ripple far beyond the gate. And as the convoy finally came into view, Emily's heart tightened with anticipation. Something about this moment felt different, heavier, more consequential than the usual flow of arrivals. She straightened, ready to meet the approaching vehicles with the calm authority that had defined her entire career at the gate. She was a silent watcher, a quiet observer, but today, she sensed, she might become something more. The morning air seemed to thrum with anticipation as Emily Carter scanned the horizon. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of her booth, her posture straight and alert. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a ripple of movement far down the main road of the base. Engines roared softly in the distance, steadily growing louder with each passing second. Emily straightened further, her instincts honed over years of observation, telling her this was no ordinary convoy. Through the misty morning haze, the first vehicle appeared, a sleek black SUV, its glossy exterior reflecting the early sunlight in sharp, dazzling angles. Behind it, several more black SUVs followed in perfect formation. Their arrival immediately drew attention. Soldiers paused mid-step, and other guards leaned slightly forward, curiosity mixing with a trace of apprehension. Emily's heart beat a little faster, but she remained calm. She had trained for situations like this. The difference was that no training could prepare her for the uncertainty of who or what was inside. Her supervisor's voice crackled through the radio. VIP convoy incoming. ID verification mandatory. No exceptions. Emily nodded to herself. No exceptions. That principle had guided every action she had ever taken at the gate. It didn't matter how important the person might be. Protocol was protocol, and she would follow it without hesitation. Still, a spark of nervous excitement danced in her chest. There was something almost cinematic about the scene, the sunlight glinting off the black SUVs, the precise formation of the vehicles, the tension hanging thick in the air. The first vehicle rolled up to the gate and slowed. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady. "Good morning. IDs, please." A uniformed officer, seated in the passenger seat, handed her a folder. Emily took it carefully, scanning the documents inside. Everything appeared to be in order, but her practiced eyes caught a detail others might have missed, a slight discrepancy in a stamp, a minor issue that required verification. She raised her gaze and addressed the driver, her tone professional and unwavering. "Ma'am, I need you to step out for a secondary verification," she said. The officer blinked in surprise. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice tinged with irritation. "This is Commander Rourke." Emily didn't flinch. She had been trained for moments like this. "Protocol requires it," she said simply. "No one is exempt." The air seemed to thicken with tension. Other guards glanced nervously at Emily, unsure whether she had made a mistake. The officer stepped out, hesitantly at first, then more firmly as Emily maintained her calm, professional demeanor. She inspected every document carefully, confirming each hologram, signature, and verification mark. The officer's sharp gaze flicked toward her repeatedly, and Emily caught the trace of surprise in his expression. He hadn't expected a civilian gate guard to stand her ground with such unwavering authority. As the secondary check proceeded, Emily's mind raced, cataloging every detail. The vehicles behind the first SUV were now approaching, moving in perfect synchronization. Drivers adjusted their speed slightly, waiting for her signal. She noticed subtle signals from the lead officer inside the first SUV, a nod here, a gesture there, and interpreted them quickly. Years of observation had taught her that in situations like this, small cues often carried critical information. A whisper ran through the other guards at the gate. "Is that?" someone murmured, trailing off uncertainly. Emily ignored the murmurs. She focused solely on her duty, aware that any lapse in attention could have consequences far beyond her understanding. Finally, after a few tense minutes, the documents were verified. Emily straightened, signaling the vehicle to proceed. But before it could move, the door opened and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. His presence was immediate and commanding. Emily's instincts told her he was someone important, someone trained in both authority and observation. She straightened further, her posture unyielding as the man's gaze swept over her. It was Commander James Rourke, a decorated Navy SEAL recently returned from deployment. His reputation preceded him, missions behind enemy lines, leadership under pressure, and a calm, unshakable presence even in the most chaotic circumstances. Emily had never met him, but she had heard the stories whispered among the base. Yet here he was, standing just a few feet away, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The surrounding noise, the engines, the chatter, the clatter of boots faded into the background. Emily felt the weight of the moment press down on her shoulders. This wasn't just a simple gate check anymore. This was a test of character, of courage, of integrity. And though no one else seemed to notice, Emily felt it deeply. This moment could define how she was seen, not just by the commander, but by herself. Commander Rourke stepped closer, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. Emily's heart raced, yet her training kept her grounded. She met his gaze directly, holding her stance as she had been taught. The moment was heavy with unspoken possibilities. Would he reprimand her for insisting on protocol? Would he dismiss her entirely? Or could this unexpected encounter become something extraordinary? He stopped a few feet from her, silent for a long, measured beat. Then, unexpectedly, he raised his hand and saluted her. The gesture shocked everyone present. Guards froze mid-step, jaws slack with disbelief. Emily herself felt a jolt of disbelief, followed immediately by a deep, swelling sense of pride. A SEAL commander, one of the most respected figures on the base, had saluted her first. She stood motionless, unsure how to respond, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would betray her composure. Commander Rourke's voice broke the silence, calm but carrying undeniable authority. "You did exactly what needed to be done," he said quietly. "You followed protocol without hesitation. That takes courage." The other guards exchanged glances, suddenly realizing the significance of the moment. Emily's hands, which had been at her sides, rose automatically in return salute, careful, precise. The weight of the recognition, the honor implicit in his gesture, settled over her like a mantle she hadn't expected but deserved. For Emily, the moment was transformative. She had spent years at the gate, unseen, unrecognized. Yet in this single act, she understood that her dedication had not gone unnoticed. Her vigilance, her commitment, and her unwavering adherence to duty had earned the respect of someone who understood sacrifice better than most. And that respect, she realized, transcended rank, reputation, or fame. The commander's gaze lingered for another brief moment. Then he lowered his hand and stepped back. "Carry on," he said, turning to continue toward his convoy. The black SUVs moved forward, engines humming smoothly as they disappeared down the main road. The base seemed to exhale collectively, returning to the rhythm of normal activity, yet the energy in the air had shifted. Emily lowered her salute slowly, feeling a rush of emotion she couldn't immediately name: pride, relief, astonishment, and a deep sense of validation. She had stood her ground, as she always did, and in doing so, she had earned a moment of respect that would linger in her memory forever. As the day continued, Emily reflected on what had just occurred. Her routine, once mundane, now felt profoundly significant. She realized that integrity, courage, and steadfastness, qualities she had always valued, had a quiet power capable of altering perceptions, even in the most unexpected ways. She wasn't just a gate guard. She was a part of something larger, a witness to honor, a participant in the culture of respect that defined the military she had long admired from a distance. For the rest of the morning, Emily continued her duties with renewed focus. She greeted soldiers and officers alike with a subtle sense of pride in her posture and a calm confidence that hadn't been there before. Every interaction carried the invisible weight of her experience, the quiet authority earned in the briefest yet most meaningful exchange she had ever faced. And though the commander had gone, his salute remained with her, an unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes the smallest acts of duty could ripple into moments of extraordinary significance. The moment had passed, yet Emily Carter's mind refused to settle. The adrenaline that had surged with the commander's unexpected salute lingered, a persistent thrum in her chest. The black SUVs had disappeared down the road, their engines fading into the hum of the base's daily activity. But the weight of what had just happened pressed on her like a tangible force. She had followed protocol, as she always did, and yet a seed of doubt had taken root. Was she bold or reckless? Courageous or foolish? Emily returned her gaze to the ID scanner, her fingers brushing over the cool surface as though seeking reassurance. She had insisted on secondary verification for the convoy, even knowing the presence of Commander Rourke. The thought of what might have happened if she had hesitated or worse, let protocol slide, sent a shiver down her spine. Years of training, every lecture from her father, every quiet morning spent observing the base, all of it had prepared her for moments like this. But preparation did not extinguish doubt entirely. Other guards began to whisper, their voices low but tinged with curiosity and disbelief. "Did you see that?" "He saluted her first," one muttered. "A gate guard?" Another shook his head, adding, "She didn't even flinch." "Who is she?" Emily ignored them, focusing instead on the rhythm of her duty. She knew that any slip now, any lapse in professionalism, could unravel the hard-earned respect she had just received. Every interaction, every gesture, mattered. The supervisor approached cautiously, his expression unreadable. He stopped beside her booth, clearing his throat. "Emily, that was unconventional," he said carefully. "Most people would have let it slide, given who was in the lead vehicle. Are you certain you handled that correctly?" Emily met his gaze squarely. Her voice was steady, calm, but carried an unshakable conviction. "I followed protocol," she said simply. "That's my job. No exceptions. If I compromise the rules for anyone, I compromise the integrity of this gate." The supervisor nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed lingering doubt. He had seen countless guards falter under pressure, especially when VIPs arrived. Emily knew that he was processing more than her words. He was measuring her resolve, testing whether she truly understood the weight of her actions. She stood firm, and though his next words were clipped, they carried acknowledgement. "Good. Keep your focus. That's all that matters." For a brief moment, Emily allowed herself to breathe, but the calm was fleeting. Doubt returned, not about her competence, but about perception. What would the other officers think? What if they considered her arrogant or overstepping her boundaries? Pride was a dangerous companion. Humility, even more so. She reflected on the lessons her father had imparted. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's standing your ground quietly when everyone expects you to bend. She clung to that truth, using it to anchor herself amid the swirling uncertainties. The base seemed to hum with a rhythm that had shifted subtly. Soldiers and officers moved past her station, casting glances of curiosity and subtle admiration. Emily noticed the whispered conversations, the fleeting nods, the recognition in their eyes. Yet she also detected skepticism in some, questioning whether a civilian at the gate had overstepped boundaries. For the first time in years, Emily felt the dual weight of visibility and scrutiny, the uncomfortable awareness that her actions, however principled, were now being judged on a broader stage. As she continued her watch, a series of minor incidents tested her composure. A delivery truck approached at an unusual speed, forcing her to signal it to halt. A young officer fumbled with his badge, asking redundant questions that challenged her patience. Through it all, Emily maintained poise, relying on the calm, methodical approach that had defined her mornings. Doubt whispered at the edges of her mind, but she refused to let it dictate her actions. She had seen what hesitation could do, and she would not falter now. Emily's thoughts drifted momentarily to Commander Rourke. His salute had been a gesture of profound respect, yet it had also placed her in an unaccustomed spotlight. She wondered if he truly understood the internal struggle she faced, the balancing act between duty and perception. She realized that respect, once earned, carried responsibility. Every action she took from this point forward would be measured against that moment. The salute had not only validated her integrity, but also elevated expectations. A soft breeze carried the scent of gasoline and early morning dew across the gate, mingling with the subtle aroma of coffee from a nearby mess hall. Emily closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself in the familiar sensory cues of her post. She reminded herself that her role was not to impress or to seek acknowledgement. It was to enforce standards, to ensure safety, and to uphold the honor of the gate. This internal mantra helped silence the doubt that threatened to creep in. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emily scanned each approaching vehicle with meticulous care, observing drivers, passengers, and subtle cues with unwavering attention. Her senses were heightened, tuned to detect anomalies that others might overlook. A flicker of hesitation here, a slight frown there, the tension in a passenger's grip on a briefcase, each detail mattered. She had learned over the years that vigilance was more than a set of procedures. It was a mindset, a commitment to seeing beyond appearances. Her mind briefly replayed a conversation with her father years ago, during one of their rare visits home. "Emily," he had said, voice steady and deliberate, "the right choice isn't always the easiest one, and the right choice will often feel uncomfortable at first. If you falter in those moments, you lose more than just respect, you lose integrity." She held that lesson close now, letting it guide her thoughts and actions. Then, as if confirming her instinct, another convoy approached from the far side of the base. This one was smaller, quieter, yet it bore the unmistakable weight of authority. Emily recognized the subtle cues immediately: the careful alignment of the vehicles, the measured pace, the disciplined posture of the officers inside. Her training kicked in instantly. She prepared for verification, double-checking credentials with precision, her hands moving confidently across the scanner and documents. The minor incidents, the whispers, the doubts, they all faded in the face of this new arrival. Emily understood that every challenge she faced that morning, every moment of internal uncertainty, had prepared her for this. She realized that courage was not the absence of doubt, but the mastery of it. She faced each officer, each document, and each subtle test of authority with unwavering professionalism, letting her integrity shine through in every decision. By mid-morning, Emily had regained a sense of calm, yet the lingering shadow of doubt remained. It was a reminder that every act of courage came with weight, that recognition carried responsibility, and that integrity demanded constant vigilance. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to feel the quiet pride in her adherence to protocol, a subtle satisfaction of knowing she had acted rightly, even under scrutiny. And as she resumed her watch, scanning the gates with sharp eyes and steady hands, Emily realized something profound. Moments of doubt were not weaknesses. They were opportunities. Each internal struggle, each hesitation, was a chance to reaffirm her values, to demonstrate that courage was quiet, steadfast, and resolute. She would face the rest of the day with that understanding, ready for whatever challenges awaited beyond the gate. The convoy slowed as it neared the gate, and Emily Carter's heart quickened, though her posture remained precise and unwavering. She had faced countless arrivals before, but today felt different, charged with tension she could not yet name. Her eyes scanned the lead vehicle, a sleek black SUV, its glossy surface reflecting the early sunlight in jagged, dancing streaks. The air seemed heavier, as if the world had leaned in to watch this moment unfold. Soldiers and officers on the base paused mid-step, their attention drawn to the gate, sensing that something unusual was afoot. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. Emily immediately recognized him from the whispered stories circulating on base. Commander James Rourke, a Navy SEAL whose exploits were legendary. He moved with a quiet authority, his posture straight, every step deliberate and measured. There was no hurry in his motion, no hint of arrogance, only confidence, honed by years of discipline and experience. Emily's instincts told her she was witnessing a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. Time seemed to stretch. The clatter of boots, the distant hum of engines, even the whisper of wind across the gate, all fell away. Emily's senses sharpened, each sound and motion amplified as she faced the commander. She had seen him in passing, in photographs, and in official briefings, but nothing prepared her for the weight of his presence in person. The stories were true. This man exuded a quiet power that could fill a room without words. And yet, as he approached, he did something entirely unexpected. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze meeting hers with a clarity that pierced through any pretense or doubt. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition. He was studying her, not merely observing her duty, but assessing her character, her composure, her integrity. For years, she had wondered if anyone truly noticed her at the gate. Now, in a single, unspoken moment, she felt as though her years of vigilance, her quiet discipline, and her steadfast dedication were being acknowledged in a way she had never imagined possible. Then, without a word, Commander Rourke raised his hand and saluted her. The gesture shocked everyone present. Guards froze mid-step, jaws slack with disbelief. Soldiers stopped in their tracks, eyes wide, whispers spreading like wildfire across the base. Emily herself felt a jolt of disbelief, her heart pounding so fiercely that she thought it might betray her composure. A SEAL Commander, one of the most respected and formidable figures on the base, had saluted her first. She stood motionless, caught between astonishment and an overwhelming sense of pride. Her mind raced as the salute held, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. She remembered the countless mornings spent at the gate, unnoticed, uncelebrated, performing her duties with unwavering attention. She remembered the recruits she had quietly guided, the minor incidents she had handled without recognition, the rules she had upheld even when bending them might have seemed easier. All of it, the small, invisible acts of duty, had led to this moment. And now, for the first time, she felt seen. Commander Rourke's gaze remained steady, assessing her with the calm precision of a seasoned operator. There was no condescension in his eyes, no hint of patronizing approval, only respect, quiet and absolute. "You followed protocol," he said, his voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. "That takes courage." Emily's mind struggled to process the words. Courage, recognition, respect. She had never thought of her role in such grand terms. It had always been about diligence, integrity, and doing her job without fail. Yet here it was, distilled into a single moment, acknowledged by someone whose life had been defined by acts of courage far beyond her imagination. She returned the salute automatically, careful and precise. Her arm moved with a practiced rhythm ingrained over years, but her heart soared with a joy she could not articulate. Around them, the base seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers and guards exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the unusual yet profoundly significant act. In that instant, Emily realized that respect was not about rank, fame, or visibility. It was about recognition of character and action, even in the smallest roles. The commander spoke again, stepping slightly closer. "The first line of defense isn't always behind a weapon," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's in moments like this, doing the right thing, without hesitation, even when no one is watching." The weight of his words sank in. Emily thought of the minor details she had observed that morning, the hesitant recruits, the anxious officers, the anomalies she had caught before any incident could escalate. Each small act, unnoticed by the majority, now carried monumental significance. In the presence of someone who understood sacrifice and vigilance better than most, she realized her role was not ordinary at all. She was part of the foundation that allowed the larger operations of the base to function safely and efficiently. Other guards, once uncertain, now straightened, inspired by the sight. Soldiers who had passed her without acknowledgement now offered respectful nods. Emily could see the ripple effect. The salute was more than a personal honor. It was a statement to the entire base that integrity, diligence, and quiet courage mattered. Even the whispers of doubt that had lingered in her mind moments before were silenced by the undeniable force of the gesture. For Emily, the moment was transformative. She had spent years feeling invisible at the gate, performing duties that seemed small, unremarkable, and often overlooked. Yet in this single act, she understood that every act of integrity mattered, no matter how minor it appeared to others. Her presence, her attention to detail, and her unwavering adherence to protocol had been acknowledged in a way that transcended rank and reputation. She felt a surge of emotion she could barely contain, a mixture of pride, astonishment, and a deep, almost sacred joy. The salute was not just a recognition of her actions, but an affirmation of her values, the principles that had guided her through years of quiet diligence. Emily felt the truth of her father's words resonate in her heart. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steadfast, and unseen. And yet, it can change everything. The commander lowered his hand slowly, his expression calm but warm. "Carry on," he said, turning toward his convoy. His steps were measured, deliberate, and filled with authority. Yet there was an unmistakable softness in the acknowledgment he had offered. The black SUVs rolled forward, engines humming smoothly as they disappeared down the main road, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with reverence and silent admiration. Emily lowered her own salute gradually, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She took a deep breath, feeling a profound mixture of exhilaration and quiet humility. Around her, the base resumed its rhythm, but the energy had shifted. Guards and soldiers moved with a newfound sense of respect, their glances lingering on her briefly before returning to their tasks. Emily realized that the moment had left a lasting impression, not just on her, but on everyone who witnessed it. She allowed herself a private smile, recalling the countless mornings she had spent standing at this gate, unseen and unrecognized. Those mornings had been ordinary to everyone else, yet today they had culminated in a moment of extraordinary validation. Her vigilance, discipline, and quiet courage had been acknowledged in a way she had never expected, but would never forget. As she returned to her duties, Emily felt an unwavering sense of purpose. The salute had not changed her role, nor had it made her duties easier, but it had affirmed that doing the right thing, even in the smallest capacity, carried immense weight. It reminded her that integrity, diligence, and courage, no matter how quiet or overlooked, could ripple outward, inspiring those around her and earning the respect of even the most formidable figures. Emily scanned the base once more, her eyes steady, her heart resolute. The moment had passed, but its impact lingered, embedding itself into her consciousness. She was no longer merely a gate guard. She was a guardian of principles, a witness to honor, and a participant in a quiet but powerful legacy. And though the day continued, and convoys would come and go, she knew that this moment, the salute that had frozen time, would remain with her forever. The salute had passed, the convoy had moved on, and yet the reverberations of the moment lingered in the morning air. Emily Carter remained at her post, scanning the incoming vehicles with the practiced vigilance that had defined her career at the gate. But something had shifted. The base itself seemed different. Charged with a subtle energy, she could almost feel a recognition that integrity and courage were not merely duties, but values capable of inspiring others. She caught the eyes of passing guards, some lingering a moment longer than usual, offering nods of acknowledgement that had previously been absent. Soldiers who had once walked past without a glance now met her gaze, and she noticed the subtle changes in posture, the newfound respect in their movements. The smallest gestures, salutes returned, brief nods, slight smiles spoke volumes. Emily realized that respect, once earned through action, could ripple outward like concentric circles on water, touching people who might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Her mind replayed the encounter with Commander Rourke. The calm authority in his eyes, the deliberate yet understated nature of his gesture, and the words he had spoken, all of it left a lasting impression. The first line of defense isn't always behind a weapon. It's doing the right thing, without hesitation, even when no one is watching. Those words echoed in her mind as she continued her work, reminding her that her role, though small in the grand hierarchy, had immeasurable significance. The rest of the morning unfolded with the familiar rhythm of base operations, yet Emily felt a subtle difference. Each interaction, no matter how minor, carried weight. She greeted a young recruit nervously approaching the gate, offering the same calm professionalism that had guided her for years. This time, however, there was a spark of acknowledgement in his eyes. as if he sensed that her authority extended beyond protocol, rooted in courage and principle. Emily allowed herself a quiet smile. Even routine deliveries took on new significance. A truck pulled up carrying supplies for the base cafeteria. The driver, accustomed to being waved through without much thought, stopped as Emily signaled. She inspected the documents with care, noting every detail, and the driver returned a respectful nod that had not been offered before. It was as if the morning had transformed the lens through which everyone saw her. The guard at the next station even glanced over, a mixture of curiosity and newfound admiration in his expression. Emily's thoughts drifted to her father. A retired Marine, he had always stressed the importance of integrity in the face of adversity. Respect isn't given, Emily. It's earned, quietly and consistently. And sometimes it comes when you least expect it. Today, she had experienced that firsthand. The salute from Commander Rourke was not just recognition. It was validation of years of diligence, of moments when she had upheld protocol despite doubt, scrutiny, and invisibility. By midday, Emily found herself reflecting on the subtle ways her actions had influenced others. A young corporal who had previously ignored her now stopped to offer a brief, formal salute. A sergeant in passing gave a nod of respect, his eyes lingering a fraction longer than usual. Emily realized that leadership and influence were not always tied to rank or title. They could manifest in a quiet, steadfast commitment to principles. Her gait was more than a post-it, was a stage upon which integrity could be displayed, modeled, and recognized. The ripple effect extended beyond the immediate base staff. Stories of the morning's unusual event spread quickly among the personnel. Whispers traveled from one corner of the base to another. "Did you see the commander salute her first? I've never seen anything like that." She didn't flinch at all, held her ground perfectly. Emily could hear fragments of these conversations as she conducted her inspections. Each one a reminder that her commitment had resonated far beyond the simple act of following protocol. Even higher-ranking officers began to take notice. A captain walking past her station paused briefly, adjusting his uniform, and nodded in a manner that conveyed more than casual acknowledgement. Emily felt a quiet pride welling within her, but she remained composed. Recognition, while gratifying, did not alter the core of her work. She continued her duties with meticulous attention, knowing that respect earned through action was more valuable than any fleeting praise. The noon sun climbed high, casting sharp shadows across the gate, and Emily felt the warmth on her face as she leaned slightly to adjust her stance. Her mind wandered to the symbolic power of the salute. It had transformed her perception of herself. Yes, but it had also altered the perception of everyone who had witnessed it. Integrity, courage, and professionalism had proven contagious. People were now mirroring the respect she had consistently demonstrated, quietly reshaping the culture around her. A group of new recruits approached, their footsteps tentative and uncertain. Emily greeted them with calm authority, guiding them through the proper protocol. She noticed subtle shifts in their demeanor, posture straightening, eyes meeting hers with a newfound understanding, a trace of admiration in their cautious smiles. These small changes, imperceptible to many, were monumental to Emily. She recognized that influence was rarely dramatic. It was measured in moments like this, in subtle adjustments that reflected awareness and respect. By mid-afternoon, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The salute had not only validated her own work, but had set a standard for others to follow. She observed guards and soldiers moving through the base with heightened attentiveness, a silent acknowledgement that adherence to duty, even in minor roles, could inspire and command respect. She understood that her job was no longer simply about maintaining order at the gate. It was about embodying principles that others could emulate. The day continued with a series of challenges, from minor logistical complications to moments requiring split-second judgment. Emily approached each with the same steadfast professionalism she had always employed, yet now she carried an additional layer of confidence. The earlier recognition had reinforced her understanding that courage and integrity were not only personal virtues, they were powerful examples for others. Her calm decisiveness influenced the environment around her, creating a ripple of respect that extended beyond immediate interactions. Emily's reflection turned inward. For years, she had felt invisible, her efforts unnoticed and unappreciated. Yet today, she realized the quiet power of consistency. Recognition, when it came, was not about ego or reward. It was about the acknowledgement of steadfast dedication and moral courage. The salute from Commander Rourke had illuminated this truth, not as an isolated gesture, but as a statement about the intrinsic value of principled action. By late afternoon, Emily's focus remained unbroken, yet the morning's events continued to resonate. She had always known the importance of her role, but now the base itself seemed to recognize it. Soldiers approached with subtle deference, junior officers observed her with new awareness, and even casual passers-by treated her with a level of respect previously unseen. Emily felt a profound sense of purpose, understanding that her quiet dedication had created a legacy of influence that would endure long after the day ended. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the gate, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had earned respect not by seeking it, not by flaunting authority, but through years of disciplined, principled action. The morning's extraordinary events had amplified what had always been true. Courage, integrity, and steadfastness are always visible, even when unnoticed. And when acknowledged, they inspire respect that radiates far beyond the individual. The day wound down, yet the lessons lingered. Emily realized that recognition was temporary, but the values that earned it were enduring. She had become more than a gate guard. She was a model of principle, an example for others, and a quiet force shaping the culture of her base. The salute, though fleeting, had created ripples of respect that would last far longer than any single interaction. As night approached, and Emily prepared to conclude her shift, she felt a profound satisfaction. The day had tested her resolve, validated her principles, and reshaped the perception of those around her. She understood that respect, once earned through courage and integrity, was not only a reward, but a responsibility she would continue to uphold every day at the gate, regardless of recognition or circumstance. And as she glanced toward the now quiet main road, Emily knew, without doubt, that the morning's events had changed her life. The respect she had earned that day was not a fleeting moment. It was a permanent acknowledgement of her values, her character, and her unwavering commitment to duty. The day after Commander Rourke's unexpected salute, Emily Carter arrived at her post before dawn, as she always did. The air was crisp and carried the familiar scent of gasoline, morning dew, and faint traces of gunpowder from nearby training grounds. But the atmosphere felt different. The base seemed quieter, yet charged with subtle energy, an invisible acknowledgement that yesterday had been a day unlike any other. Emily straightened her uniform and adjusted her cap, as if that simple ritual could somehow anchor the extraordinary events of the previous morning. She had returned to routine task scanning IDs, inspecting documents, and observing the flow of personnel, but the weight of yesterday lingered in her mind. Every step she took, every motion she performed at the gate, carried a new dimension. Her role, once unremarkable and largely invisible, now felt imbued with significance. Soldiers and officers approached her with heightened awareness, many offering polite nods and quiet smiles, as if yesterday had elevated her in their eyes, without a single word exchanged. By mid-morning, word of the salute had begun to spread beyond the immediate base. A few junior officers had shared the story in hushed tones, their awe tinged with disbelief. Soon, Whispers reached higher-ranking personnel, culminating in a brief note from the base's administrative office. Emily Carter, gate guard, recognized for exemplary adherence to protocol and conduct. Incident reviewed and commended. Emily read the memo in quiet astonishment. Recognition of this sort was rare, almost unheard of for someone in her position. Her chest swelled with a mixture of pride and humility. She realized that her steadfast commitment to duty, often overlooked, had finally been acknowledged in a concrete, lasting way. Yet, amid the validation, she felt a familiar tug of anxiety. Recognition brought visibility, and visibility brought scrutiny. Would she be able to maintain the standards she had set for herself under this new weight? As the morning progressed, journalists from the local base newsletter arrived, eager to document the unusual incident. Emily welcomed them with her customary professionalism, guiding them through the gate while answering their questions with clarity and calm authority. She found herself repeating details carefully, mindful not to exaggerate or sensationalize. The story, after all, was not about her ego. It was about the principles she had upheld, the courage to follow protocol, even under pressure, and the ripple effects of integrity. The journalists were captivated. Photographs were taken, interviews recorded, and every detail of the salute carefully noted. Emily answered their questions with composure, emphasizing the importance of duty over recognition, procedure over status, and integrity over convenience. She explained how, for years, her role had been one of quiet diligence, checking IDs, observing behavior, and maintaining the first line of defense without expectation of acknowledgement. Her calm demeanor and thoughtful words only amplified the significance of her actions. Within hours, the story began to circulate beyond the base. Online forums, social media groups dedicated to military life, and regional news outlets picked up the tale. Readers were drawn to the narrative of a civilian gate guard who, through courage and steadfastness, earned the respect of a highly decorated Navy SEAL. Emily's story resonated widely because it embodied a universal truth. Integrity and adherence to principle are powerful, regardless of rank, title, or visibility. Despite the growing attention, Emily remained grounded. She continued her duties with the same meticulous care as before, greeting recruits, guiding vehicles, and observing subtle shifts in the behavior of personnel. She had learned that recognition was fleeting, but the discipline and vigilance that earned it were enduring. Each ID scanned, each interaction managed with professionalism, was a reaffirmation of the values that had guided her for years. As afternoon arrived, Emily took a brief moment to step away from her booth. She walked along the perimeter of the gate, absorbing the sights and sounds of the base she had long considered familiar. Soldiers ran drills in the distance, the clatter of boots on asphalt creating a rhythmic cadence. The sun reflected off the nearby hangars, casting golden light across the concrete. Emily felt a profound connection to her environment, a sense of belonging that transcended the mere physicality of her post. Her thoughts drifted to her father, whose guidance had shaped her career and her character. Respect isn't given. It's earned, he had said. Emily realized that the morning's events and the attention they had garnered were a direct testament to that lesson. She had not sought recognition, nor had she acted with the hope of reward. Her commitment had been intrinsic, grounded in personal and professional integrity. And now, finally, that commitment had been acknowledged. A young recruit approached timidly, holding out an ID. Emily scanned it carefully, noting the nervous tension in his stance. He looked up at her, eyes wide with awe, and whispered, "I heard what happened yesterday." Ma'am. Congratulations." Emily smiled softly, offering him guidance and reassurance. It was moments like these, small yet significant, that reminded her of the broader impact of her actions. By adhering to her principles, she had not only earned respect, but had also set an example for the next generation of soldiers. As the day wore on, Emily's story continued to gain attention. Her story became a talking point in informal conversations across the base. Fellow guards began to approach her, seeking advice or simply pausing to acknowledge her. Officers she had known for years now treated her with heightened deference, subtly deferring to her judgment and recognizing the authority her conduct had established. Emily understood that respect was not merely a title conferred by rank. It was cultivated through consistent action, attention to detail, and unwavering adherence to principle. Even Commander Rourke's name continued to echo in her thoughts. The man whose salute had transformed her perception of herself and her role had reinforced a universal truth. Courage and integrity are always recognized, even if subtly, even if belatedly. Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the acknowledgement itself, but for the lesson it imparted, that the right choice, even in the smallest capacity, carries weight far beyond immediate perception. As evening approached, Emily reflected on the day's events and the broader implications of her story. Recognition had a profound power to shift perceptions, inspire others, and reinforce principles. Yet she also recognized that the essence of her work, the quiet commitment to vigilance, fairness, and integrity, remained unchanged. The salute, the media attention, and the accolades were temporary. The discipline and character that earned them were permanent. She walked slowly back to our booth, her gaze sweeping across the base. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the concrete in a warm, golden light. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day and the profound significance of her experiences. She had earned respect through action, not expectation. She had demonstrated courage in adherence to principle, and she had inspired others, quietly, subtly, yet unmistakably. As she resumed her watch, Emily felt a profound sense of connection to her role, to the people around her, and to the principles that guided her life. The story beyond the gate was no longer just about a salute. It was about integrity, courage, and the ripple effects of small acts of principle. She understood that the impact of her actions extended far beyond the immediate moment, touching lives, inspiring respect, and shaping culture. And as the evening shadows lengthened, Emily Carter, standing resolutely at her post, realized the truth she had always known, but had never fully experienced. Doing the right thing, quietly and consistently, was a force more powerful than recognition, more enduring than fame, and more transformative than any single act. The story beyond the gate had only just begun. Weeks had passed since the day Commander Rourke had saluted Emily Carter. The memory of that moment still lingered in her mind like a quiet echo, a pulse that reminded her of both the extraordinary and the everyday significance of her role. Life at the base had resumed its rhythm, yet subtle changes had taken root. Soldiers and officers treated her with a level of respect that had grown steadily over the days, not because of her recognition, but because her steadfast professionalism had inspired confidence. Emily understood that true respect was earned, maintained, and demonstrated consistently. It could not be demanded or assumed. She arrived at the gate that morning with her usual precision, the crispness of her uniform and the calm of her demeanor signaling readiness. Even as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the asphalt, Emily felt a deep sense of purpose. Her role was no longer merely functional. It had become symbolic, an embodiment of vigilance and integrity. The gate she had manned for years, often unnoticed, had transformed into a stage where principles were enacted and witnessed daily. New recruits approached her station, their eyes wide with curiosity and perhaps a touch of reverence. They had heard stories of the salute, of Emily's unwavering dedication, and many looked to her as both an example and a guide. One young recruit hesitated at the edge of the line, clutching his ID, his expression uncertain. Emily offered a calm, reassuring smile. "Relax," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Follow the steps, and you'll do fine." The recruit nodded, his tension easing, and Emily felt the quiet satisfaction of having influenced yet another life through guidance, patience, and example. Emily's reflections were interrupted by the arrival of a convoy, standard yet still significant. She processed each ID with meticulous care, observing the movements, demeanor, and subtle cues of every individual. Years of experience had honed her instincts, and she noticed things others might miss. A slight hesitation in a driver's hands, the nervous adjustment of a passenger's uniform, the rhythm of footsteps as soldiers approached. Her mind catalogued every detail, aware that vigilance was not a static act, but a constant engagement with nuance, observation, and discernment. The gate had become more than an entry point. It was a focal point of trust and accountability. Emily realized that her actions now held broader weight. Every decision, every adherence to protocol reverberated through the base, shaping perceptions, reinforcing discipline, and strengthening the culture of respect. She understood that her own vigilance had created a quiet ripple effect, influencing behavior and setting a standard that others could aspire to. Her thoughts drifted to Commander Rourke. Though their interaction had been brief, it had left a lasting impression. His salute had symbolized acknowledgement, yes, but also the validation of her values, principles, and discipline. Emily had carried the lesson forward, internalizing the truth that courage and integrity are not measured by visibility or accolades, but by consistent action, even in the absence of recognition. The ripple that began with a single salute had expanded beyond the moment, influencing not only her perception of herself, but also the culture around her. Mid-morning brought a minor incident that tested her composure and judgment. A delivery truck approached too quickly, its driver appearing flustered and distracted. Emily acted immediately, signaling him to stop and guiding the vehicle safely into position. She inspected the manifests, verified the cargo, and ensured compliance with base security protocols. The driver, a civilian unfamiliar with military precision, offered a nervous apology, and Emily responded with calm authority. In moments like this, she understood that her vigilance, patience, and principled action could prevent errors, accidents, or misunderstandings before they occurred. By afternoon, Emily's influence was unmistakable. Junior guards now sought her guidance on procedures, asking questions about protocol, verification processes, and handling difficult situations. Officers occasionally glanced her way, acknowledging her presence with subtle nods or brief words of encouragement. The respect she had earned through steadfast adherence to duty was no longer fragile. It had become a quiet foundation upon which trust and confidence were built. Her role had evolved, from gate guard to mentor, from observer to example, from unnoticed presence to central figure in the daily life of the base. Emily often found herself reflecting on the symbolism of her position. Standing at the gate was more than a task. It was an embodiment of discipline, observation, and vigilance. She realized that her influence extended beyond the immediate physical space, shaping attitudes, reinforcing standards, and modeling integrity for those around her. Each ID scanned, each vehicle guided, and each recruit instructed was an opportunity to enact values she had held long before recognition had arrived. Her father's words resonated now more than ever. Respect is earned through consistent action, through vigilance and integrity, and through courage in moments when no one is watching. Emily had lived those words, often quietly, and now the world seemed to reflect back the truth of her dedication. Yet she remained humble, aware that recognition was not the goal, but the natural consequence of principled action. As the day drew to a close, Emily noticed a small group of soldiers lingering near the gate. They whispered among themselves, stealing glances at her, then approached with respectful curiosity. One young sergeant, his uniform crisp and posture precise, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "we wanted to thank you. Your example. It's inspiring. We all notice, and it makes a difference." Emily's lips curved into a gentle smile. She knew that the acknowledgement was sincere, but she also understood that her work was not about accolades. It was about the quiet influence that reinforced standards and inspired integrity. A sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Emily took a moment to step back from her booth, observing the base from her vantage point. Soldiers moved with the rhythm of discipline. Vehicles passed smoothly, and a sense of calm purpose filled the air. She realized that her presence, vigilance, and consistency had helped maintain this order. A gate had become a symbol, not only of security, but of the values that held the base together: integrity, courage, diligence, and respect. Evening settled over the base, bringing a hush to the activity. Emily adjusted her cap, straightened her uniform, and reflected on the day, the week, and the months that had followed the commander's salute. She understood that recognition, while fleeting in itself, had catalyzed something far more enduring. It had solidified her confidence, reinforced her values, and illuminated the quiet but profound influence of steadfast dedication. Her role at the gate was no longer simply a job, it was a legacy. The night shift approached, and Emily prepared for another cycle of observation, verification, and guidance. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her actions had created ripples of respect, influenced perceptions, and inspired others. Yet she also understood that the true measure of her work lay not in recognition, but in continued vigilance, consistency, and principled action. The gate would continue to demand attention, discipline, and integrity, and she was ready to meet those demands every day. As the base lights flickered on, illuminating the paths and buildings with a soft glow, Emily Carter stood at her post with a quiet, resolute sense of purpose. The salute from Commander Rourke had changed the trajectory of her life, but it was her own diligence, courage, and integrity that had sustained it. She understood, now more than ever, that true legacy was built not on single moments of recognition, but on consistent, principled action, and the influence that action imparted to those around her. And as the night deepened, the base settled into its steady rhythm. Emily continued to watch, to guide, and to uphold the values that defined her. She was no longer just a gate guard. She was a guardian of principle, a mentor, and an enduring example of what steadfast vigilance and quiet courage could achieve. Her legacy, forged in small acts of integrity, had begun to ripple outward, touching lives, shaping culture, and ensuring that the values she held dear would endure far beyond any single day.